Okay, I am back again. Now, the other day, I found a video, a 3-part video, about the biblical day, where I go over the 4 types of days described in the Bible. Okay, and we see them, I think 2 or 3 of them, listed in the definition of the Hebrew word for day. And we also see one of them at least, maybe 2 of them, in Genesis chapter 1, all throughout Genesis chapter 1, where it says evening and morning day. Okay? So, I'm going to go over the 1,000-year day, the 4 types of days real quick in the Bible, that we see in the Bible. Okay? Very briefly. I do not have time to go over all of that again. You don't have to watch the previous, but this is a follow-up video to my 3-part video, the biblical day. I have about an hour and a half, give or take, worth of stuff there. Okay, because I had a revelation about that. And then right after I filmed that video, I had a revelation about the biblical workday, which is also connected to the 6 days of work. And the 7 day. That is connected to God's timeline. Okay, that is why I am going over that. So, the 4 types of days. Number 1. A 24-hour day, like a 24-hour period. Okay, so to us, we go by midnight days, or okay, to us, a new day begins at midnight. As soon as the clock hits midnight, it is a new day. Okay, so a 24-hour day. So a new 24-hour day to us begins at midnight. Okay? I'll go deeper into that in a minute. The second type of day is the daytime day as opposed to night. Okay? That's the second type of day. The third type of day is evening and morning day. We see that throughout Genesis chapter 1. And we also see maybe hints of the 24-hour day also throughout Genesis chapter 1 and in the definition of the Hebrew word for day used in Genesis chapter 1, the very first place as mentioned. You can find, just go to Genesis chapter 1 at blueletterbible.com and look up the Hebrew word for day. Okay, and then look at the chapter. You can read all throughout the chapter where it talks about evening and morning days. Evening and morning days. Okay? I'm going to go deeper into that in a minute, what an evening and morning day is, because some people wonder. Okay, some people who don't believe in what is it? I think day age creationists are confused about what either day age creationist or I think there is a category of Christian who don't understand how there can be an evening and a morning without the sun and the moon, which God didn't create into day 4. Well, I'm going to go into that deep in a few moments in this video, okay? So anyway, okay, so let me go over let me do a quick review. The 4 types of days, I'm going to go over briefly, or 24-hour period, 24-hour day, the 24-hour period, the daytime, or the day as opposed to night, the opposite of night, evening and morning, and 1,000-year day. We see those 4 types of days mentioned in the Bible. I go over it in more detail in the video, The Biblical Day. Okay? Now then, I'm also going to go over something else too. I'm going to ask you something. In case you were wondering how there can be an evening and a morning without the sun and the moon, here's the clue. In the New Testament, I don't think there's any, or maybe there is someplace in the Old Testament, I don't know. Anywhere in the Bible, especially King James or New King James translation, anywhere in those translations where it uses the terms third hour, sixth hour, ninth hour, 11th hour. And you can do a translation comparison. You can do the math and figure out that the biblical daytime, the biblical morning, begins at 6 a.m. The third hour is 9 a.m. The sixth hour is 12 o'clock noon. The ninth hour is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The 11th hour is 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay? So, if you subtract 11 hours from 5 p.m., you get 6 a.m. If you subtract 9 hours from 3 p.m., you also get 6 a.m. If you subtract 6 hours from 12 o'clock noon, again, 6 a.m. If you subtract 3 hours from 9 a.m., you get 6 a.m. So, as we get deeper into this script, into this video, I'm going to show you something, which is part of the biblical workday as well. I'm going to show you something in Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. And even in the scriptures that I just gave time, where it clearly indicates, it gives us enough information for us to do the math. We can figure it out. We can do our own calculation. We can clearly see that the biblical 24-hour day begins at 6 p.m. The biblical daytime begins at 6 a.m. Okay? So 6 o'clock in the evening, that is a new day. Well, what we would call 6 o'clock in the evening. The Jews wouldn't call it that. So 6 o'clock in the evening, that is a new day. Okay? 6 a.m., that is the morning. Okay, that is the morning of the new day. Okay, so it's the biblical daytime begins at 6 a.m. So, evening and morning is from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Okay, evening and morning day goes from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. It is a 12-hour period, okay? So, I guess technically, which also technically brings it down to a 12-hour day, which is really what this is. So, under the category of, which is a subtype, or another name for, or which is part of the daytime. Okay, and that's also where the workday comes in at. Now then, before I go deep into the workday, I'm going to go over something. The reason why I am doing this is because there has been a slight misinterpretation of God's 7-day timeline because it has missing data. Okay, the 7-day timeline, or the 7,000-year timeline, is most likely based on scriptures such as Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 3, Exodus chapter 20, verses 9 through 11, Psalms chapter 90, verse 4, and 2 Peter 3 and 8. Those 4 verses of scriptures right there is how somebody came up with the 7,000 year timeline of God. I don't know how long ago that was or who it was. However, in my biblical day video, I used 9 verses. A total of 9 verses. In this video, I'll probably use up to 6. At least 6 verses. 2 more additional verses to the 4 that I just listed to prove my point. Okay? So, and also, here's where the misinterpretation comes in at. Well, since we go by, to us, a new 24-hour day to us begins at midnight, we naturally assume that that God's 7-day timeline, whenever we connect the 1,000-year day to the 6-day work week, to the 6-day week, and the 7th day of rest, and then do the math, 12 a.m., midnight, that's the new day. That 12 a.m. on God's timeline, that's the new millennium. That equates to the new millennium. So therefore, Jesus is coming back on the 7th millennium, on the Hebrew year 6,000. One problem with that. Going by the missing 240 years on the Hebrew calendar, we are past 6,000. It's 6,023 when you add the missing 240 years. So, the missing 240 years on the Hebrew calendar brings 5783 to 6,023. Okay? This is where that's where the problem comes in at, and that interpretation. And really, when Jesus didn't come back in the fall of 1999, that's when we should have realized that we overlooked something. But even now, 23 years later, it is still being pushed that Jesus could come back at any moment. I'm going to show you, biblically, that that's not true. That we still have 227 years until Jesus comes back. I'm going to prove that with scripture. I'm going to prove that, okay? And again, based on... So if you're going to use the 6-day work week and connect that to the 1,000-year day, and you use that to make God's timeline, if you're going to do that, then you also have to acknowledge the 4 types of the different types of days in the Bible, and you also have to acknowledge that this is 6 days of work, so it's not talking about a 24-hour period day. Okay? So 6 days you shall work, and the 7th day is a day of rest. So, presumably, every day in the evening, each day in the evening, everybody's already finished working. They're already gone home for the day. They're done working. Because, again, in scriptures I'm about to show you, the parable of the workers in the vineyard shows us what a biblical workday looks like. So we have to connect that to the 6-day work week. Okay? So the two extra scriptures that verses that I added, the sister scripture, is Matthew chapter 16. No, excuse me. Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16, and Mark chapter 15, verses 25 and 33. Okay, and now in Matthew chapter 15, verses 25 and 33, I'm going to focus on the time of day. Okay? But then the main text here is the parable of Jesus and the parable of the workers in the vineyard in Matthew chapter 26. In Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. That right there gives us a picture of the biblical workday, and that right there also shows us that the biblical workday, ends at the evening, or at 6 o'clock in the evening. Very interesting.